I bid you all a fond welcome to 3KTL, our London flavored fan show. In the red corner is myself, Ebere, even though I'm wearing white, to the sign of the purity of Arsenal Football Club. And the blue corner is my friend Omar, a Chelsea fan. How are you doing, Omar?
I'm fine. Thank you for the reverent and glorious introduction.
you, you're very welcome. Today we shall be discussing the final points of Manchester City's stadium naming rights debacle. At least that's the way we choose to see it, and its consequences for financial fair play. Omar?
Yes, I'm very interested to have this conversation, and I'm looking forward to it. I think the subject of the actual stadium naming deal is overshadowed by this supposed destruction of FFP in the most recent CAS ruling. But in reality, when you look at it, it's a very sort of it stands on its own as kind of a not so sneaky maneuver of club financial management. And it was really indicative, for me at least, of a club owner and a hierarchy that was just generally uninterested in any semblance of following the established rules, or the soon to be established rules, as we get into it. So, shall we get into it, in fact?
Certainly.
So, to get started, we should take a few minutes and set the stage. And forgive me as I glance off camera from time to time. I've actually got notes on this one, just to be sure I get it right. I think the timing of this deal is particularly notable, just given the implementation schedule of the financial fair play mandate. The original plan was set such that clubs would need to begin breaking even, that is, losing no less than 30 million euros over 3 seasons by 2012. However, early in 2010, the European Club Association, which was the successor to the G14 group, was able to negotiate an extension such that that rule wouldn't come into effect until 2015. And without that rule, that was sort of the linchpin of FFP, so all the other measurements that went along with it really didn't have a lot of enforceable meaning. So you fast forward to January 2011. Manchester City runs a huge loss in their interim statements, which incidentally, it wasn't long before that Chelsea had also released a pretty large loss as well. And so there was understandable concern about certain clubs' ability to meet these targets that were about to be set, which they had all agreed to. And Michel Platini, interestingly, came out in January and said that he had sought and received personal assurances from the city's management that they still intended to adhere to these new rules. In fact, UEFA's head of licensing, Andrea Traverso, said, and I quote, "We are in talks with the club. They are aware of the rules, and they probably have a strategy to raise their income." Probably. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. However, not long after that, in July 2011, Manchester City announced that the City of Manchester Stadium was getting renamed, and it was being renamed to the Etihad Stadium in a 10-year deal worth £400 million with Etihad Airways. No surprise that Etihad was actually owned by the same individuals that own the club and were also the shirt sponsor. So, this deal blew away the previous record for stadium naming rights, that being Madison Square Garden in New York City, which was a $300 million US deal. And I think it's safe to say that it really raised plenty of eyebrows among club owners and managers, including the scion of North London, Arsene Wenger.
Raised eyebrows. It blew off the eyebrows. It singed the
Beards
eyebrows.
were flying off everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
hats in the street.
Okay. This is where Arsene Wenger rises head and shoulders above coaches, like Mourinho, shall we say. That said, Wenger was prescient and prophetic about the City deal. He identified it as a test for UEFA FFP and for Platini, the Michel Platini, the UEFA president at the time, in particular. If anyone here is tempted to isolate Wenger's observation for whatever reason, John W. Henry, the owner of Liverpool and the Red Sox, unequivocally and full-throatedly agreed with him, saying a club's best player has to be worth at least 10% of your naming rights. Mr. Wenger says boldly what everyone thinks. As Wenger foresaw, FFP has now met its Waterloo at the hands of City after they escaped serious sanction by appealing to the Court of Arbitration for Sports. And of course, UEFA also knew that this was a problem right from the very beginning, but they did not take the active measures needed to make sure it did not undermine FFP. And here we are today.
Very interesting, especially what you said there at the end. I'm not so sure I agree after reading so many pieces and kind of ruminating over this subject that FFP has truly met its end. It's certainly teetering, so to speak. But I'll also start by saying I'm cognizant that at the same time that all this was happening, Chelsea itself was trying to find a way to bring its plan to conform to FFP to full circle, and that's not lost on me. I'm going to have to begrudgingly agree with you about Arsene Wenger. He certainly was quite prophetic about that, and he was maybe more importantly, he was very much front and center with his criticism of this deal. And I've got two quotes that I'm going to use to kind of outline how I see this. First one from Wenger himself. He said, "It raises the real question about the credibility of financial fair play. They give us the message that they can get around it by doing what they want. The sponsorship cannot be doubled, tripled, or quadrupled because that means it is better if we leave everybody free, i.e. not conforming to FFP at all. He," referring to Michel Platini, "is not stupid. He knows as well that some clubs will try to get around that, and at the moment I believe they are studying behind closed doors how they can really check it." Keep that in mind. Second quote here is from Jean-Luc Dehaene, who's from the UEFA Control Board, and he said that they would benchmark all the deals to make sure that they represented fair value. So he says, "If we see clubs that are looking for loopholes, we will act. It is not enough to say, we've got a sponsorship contract and that's okay if the contract is out of line. You know where the problems are and you know you will have to confirm them. But on the other hand, they are all members of the ECA, the European Club Association, and if they don't follow the rules, they will not have the support of the other clubs." Well, he didn't prove to be accurate in that assessment, but nonetheless. In a nutshell, what you have is Wenger on one hand putting UEFA's feet to the fire. On the other hand, you have UEFA saying that they will test transactions for reasonableness, and shortly thereafter, you have UEFA again saying that they did not plan to pursue due to the threat of the legal challenge. So my question really is this, because I think that's really the salient point. If they were afraid to enforce their own laws because of the fear of legal challenge, why do the laws exist? I mean, if the point of financial fair play was for clubs to balance the books, then artificially injecting cash into a club would help them stay afloat when they otherwise wouldn't. I mean, that's the point. When you're the sponsor and the sponsor way overpays, or when you own the sponsor and the sponsor way overpays, that's essentially what you are doing. Now, on the other hand, UEFA has shown that they're not willing to enforce these rules. So where are we really?
Where that leaves us is in this sort of Netherland, this twilight zone of a financial fair play now being a moral argument instead of an enforceable, regulation. It is now what appears to be the case now, or what's left of it, is that it is now a question of persuasion.
Right.
From that UEFA, the persuasion by UEFA of clubs to apply to abide by these rules. So it's elective, at this point.
For the sake of what, I would ask, right? Is it for the sake of, say, smaller clubs, because they are the ones who are really going to be left behind here? Those clubs that can inject all this money in. We all have now billionaire owners at the top, essentially. So if we can continue to do that, and we can also afford to, we make the most amount of revenue of all of these, of all the clubs out there, the largest clubs do, I mean. So that leaves smaller clubs. So is this an appeal, an emotional appeal for the sake of the smaller clubs? Is this? I don't think the moral argument's going to work. Obviously.
It really isn't. So what I was basically outlining, when I was speaking just a moment ago, was that it's basically toothless, at this point. And since clubs, like Manchester City, let's call them and name them, shame them maybe. Since clubs like Manchester City are going to flout these rules, and they've not been interested in financial fair play right from the beginning up until now, that moral persuasion is not going to work on them at all. However, to the other question, you just raised about how this affects smaller clubs. Not that I want to beat, Arsene Wenger's drum, louder than I should, even though maybe I want to.
I know you do.
Arsene Wenger has said, he has said, I think this was last year, that perhaps financial fair play should be relaxed so that smaller clubs who are able to attract sponsors sponsors, can buy up, or invest in smaller clubs and not be restricted in doing so by financial fair play.
Right.
And he probably had, clubs like Newcastle in mind, and the guys who just took over. Which club did it? I think Dudes was I think Napoli is now owned by a Chinese gentleman. So he had such clubs in mind. When he said that. So maybe a relaxation of financial fair play, will, given, with this, if this is the case, for the comfort of investors investing in those clubs, maybe that's the way to go. Maybe smaller clubs do get something out of that scenario.
I love that you've just mentioned. I'm sure Arsene Wenger wasn't thinking, but that you've called Newcastle United a smaller club. I mean, that's definitely rich. Nonetheless,
they are smaller, aren't they? Well, you're going to say historically they are not, but yeah.
I mean, most certainly not. They are far larger. Their recent results don't reflect that. But they are far larger a club historically than Chelsea or Manchester City. I mean, whether they're bigger than Arsenal, I'm not the one.
They are not. I'm saying that they are not.
Yeah. Unequivocally.
And I don't think that they are bigger than Manchester City or Chelsea either, if you set aside the historical, dubious historical whatever.
Yeah. Well, given that Newcastle United is not the subject of this conversation, though, we will just say that their billionaire is not as willing to put the cash out as either of our billionaires. Mike Ashley is even more reticent than the Cronkies, which is saying something.
Exactly.
Okay, we'll move on, though. Something interesting you did mention, though, about relaxing financial fair play. There was originally a proposal for clubs with less than 50 million turnover to be exempt from financial fair play, but that was shot down by the club association, and I think that was probably to try and eliminate some other possible avenue for circumvention by a new owner coming and picking up a smaller club and then using that year of exemption essentially to plow money. I can't really say that for sure, but it seems like that might be one of the reasons.
Yeah, that sounds a bit uncharitable, though. but it's okay.
Well, you mean to include those clubs? Well, I think it was an idea of trying to eliminate the opportunity for someone to game the system, and those clubs did vote ultimately for the institution of FFP. So, take that for what you will. I think for me, now that we're kind of really having this conversation, I do think FFP is basically finished. I know originally a few minutes ago I said I'm not 100% sure, and obviously the most recent events at CAS may have kind of dimmed the prospects of FFP substantially to the point of death. But really, I go back to the original thought process. I said when PSG bought Neymar for 222 odd million, that I was sure that A, that violated FFP, but also that B, UEFA wouldn't pursue them because I'm sure that PSG had come out front or had conversations with UEFA and said, if you try to come after us for this, we will sue you and win and destroy everything you hold dear. And I'm sure that that conversation has been had because you just can't be that brazen without feeling like you have your legal ducks in a row. And I think that that's been the tack from a lot of them. So when you think about it that way, if you say, well, all you really have to do is show up with a bunch of lawyers and go through the process correctly, okay, understandably, UEFA waited too long, and that was essentially the output of the CAS hearing, was that UEFA waited too long to press charges on this issue, and hence their claim is unenforceable. Whether they did it again, you have to ask yourself whether there's now precedent and whether there are other legal avenues that would prevent them from being able to do it. And so I do think FFP is more or less, in the grave, despite the fact that we're all still adhering to it. So what do you think of that?
I actually, you made a fantastic point there. That in fact, if you remember, back in 2011, UEFA, when it considered pursuing Manchester City, came to the same conclusion, that they might get sued, and that Manchester City might win based on certain free trade rules, certain free trade laws in force in Europe. So there is considerable legal jeopardy with the enforcement of FFP. And during the Neymar transfer, and the gargantuan amount that was paid for him, UEFA backed away, just did not,
they didn't even touch it.
They didn't touch it at all. That was, they just, see no evil, hear no evil, think no evil, whatever it was. So yes, I think from an enforcement, and I even think that, this is me being a bit cynical, but I would say it anyway. But I think the reason why UEFA waited that long to go to court was that they wanted to go to court with a case that was weak enough for Manchester City to wriggle out of, so that they don't come after them, with all the force of, with all the, that's what I'm thinking now. With
that's an awfully expensive statement to be making.
Yes, but what else? What other option did UEFA have if they wanted to keep any shred of credibility, or if they wanted to, preserve, whatever it is that is left of financial fair play? That was their only play.
Well, as to what other option they had, I would say enforcing this back in 2012 and making good on their promise, or 2015, or whenever that they officially would feel that they were in the box to do that, would have been sensible. As to why they did it the way they did, Ebere, the world may never know. All right, that's all the time we have for today, so we're going to leave it there. A very scintillating conversation, as always. And for all of you out there, we don't want the conversation to end here. Tell us in the comments below what you think about this subject, how you think we're doing in the video, and anything else you'd like to comment about. We'd love to hear from you. So with that, I'm just going to sign off. Ebere, pleasure as always. We'll see you next week.
Likewise. Bye.